I'm Simon Marks, in for Ian Dale again tonight, and here for another edition of Cross Question. This is your chance every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday night at 8 to ask 4 prominent figures about anything that is on your mind. And those figures tonight comprise Andrew Rosindell, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Romford, Gina Miller, a businesswoman and political activist, Dan Hodges, a columnist for The Mail on Sunday, and we are going to be joined very soon by Tim Farron, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats. He's the Member of Parliament for Westmorland and Lonsdale. He speaks for the party on the environment, food and rural affairs. They're all ready for anything that you want to ask. Maybe you want to keep talking about the tragedy today in the English Channel and about what can be done about the migrant crisis, about the government's claim that it is a staunch ally of Israel, even as it terminates some arms shipments to Benjamin Netanyahu, about the Tory leadership campaign, which is hotting up, about the news that Prince Harry is not coming back to live in the UK on a full-time basis, or about anything else you might have been discussing over the dinner table. And while you are more than welcome to listen to Cross Question on the radio, you can also watch us live and in vision on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question. Watch on Global Player. This is LBC.
And we are going to start this evening with a question from Olivia in Durham that has come in on text. She says, given what has happened in the Channel today, is it time to open safe and legal routes to the UK for refugees? Andrew Rosindell, Conservative MP for Romford, let's start with you.
Well, we've always been a welcoming country to genuine refugees and asylum seekers. We have a proud history of that. So there is a mechanism already for those who genuinely seeking asylum and refuge to come here. That's shown with the number of people from Ukraine that we have welcomed to our country. What we cannot allow is a continuous flow of illegal immigrants who are being brought over by these gang masters, coming into this country illegally and losing them into our country when they have no right to be here. So what we need is a serious policy to ensure that there is a deterrent for these people coming in the first place. Now, we had that, but it wasn't implemented because of the ECHR.
I think that what Olivia is asking is whether, essentially, the safe and legal routes that currently exist are sufficient to deal with this crisis.
What I would be more concerned about is the quantity that we're taking in. So I think that Britain has a limit. We can't take everybody, and if you make it so easy for people to come here, we know that so many of these people, some are genuine, of course, but there are lots that aren't. They come here for economic reasons. And we simply cannot be the place where anyone in the world who wants to come and benefit economically to enter the United Kingdom. There is no political mandate for this. In fact, the election just gone has demonstrated how angry the country is, not only at the amount of illegal immigration that we're taking into our country, but also legal immigration. You know, we're talking about 1.5 million in the last 2 years alone. It is unsustainable.
Sorry, how do you get that
so
from
there
the
has
general
to be
election result?
control.
Did you realise that you lost by a
control.
huge majority? How did you get that from the
Gina,
result?
Gina.
No, how did you get that from the result?
Very easy. Did you notice how low the Labour share of the vote was? 33%.
Yes, but you said it was about
because
immigration.
Of our electoral system. It's one of the issues. It's a major issue on the doorstep.
No,
you weren't a candidate.
Yes, I was a candidate.
Oh, really?
I didn't
win.
And
you didn't.
No, I didn't.
And
that doesn't mean I didn't know what was on the doorstep.
People out there are furious at the levels of immigration.
Also, your schemes, okay, Ukraine, Afghanistan, Hong Kong, those are not legal routes for everyone. That's actually about specific schemes for countries that we had in place. That is completely different from legal routes. And that is, I don't understand why, irrespective of which government's in power, we don't have proper funded legal routes, border forces and agreements with the EU. I don't understand why it's so difficult to put these things in place. From what I've looked at, they aren't that difficult. It's about political capital and game playing.
Andrew?
I don't agree with that. I think that politically it is unsustainable to continue with the levels of illegal and legal immigration that we have at the moment. You seem to be
Absolutely,
arguing,
I don't agree. I
you seem
don't
to be
disagree
arguing
with that.
We make it even easier.
No, I don't
Well,
disagree with that. I don't disagree with that. But actually, when people go through the system, when they eventually get through the system, which is so underfunded and broken, 72% of those who apply actually are found to be granted status to remain in the UK. So it's about the process of getting. It is the entire system of processing people is completely broken.
That most people in this country, looking at a genuine person seeking refuge, we've always welcomed them into our country.
Yes, I know, and it's about 72%.
This system is being abused, and it cannot go on.
Let me bring Tim Farron in, who has walked into the studio in the middle of all
When I was
this.
listening outside.
Oh, so you've heard
Yes.
the question. Let me just repeat it just in case. Olivia in Durham is asking, given what has happened in the Channel today, this terrible tragedy involving 12 people, including some children, losing their lives, is it time to open safe and legal routes to the UK for refugees?
The short answer is yes, but obviously the deaths in Channel today are an utter tragedy. Every single one of those lives mattered. Those people had dignity, and they made their decision to cross for a variety of reasons we will never know. Gina said, certainly looking back over the last few years, the majority of those cases that are considered and actually processed, and the last government just didn't do that. That's the problem. That's why there are people in hotels and hostels, because the previous government just was incompetent at dealing with the backlog. But the majority of those people who've been through the system, once they are assessed, turn out to be genuine refugees. So if Andrew is right, and the majority of people are in favour of that kind of thing, then he is wrong to take the position that he does. Safe and legal routes are not the only answer, though. They're going to be a part of it. I mean, clearly, much closer relationships with our neighbours across the Channel is part of it, but also processing people quickly and efficiently, because yes, there are a proportion of those who come over who are they're asylum seekers, they turn out not to be genuine refugees, and if that's the case, you assess them quickly and efficiently, and then you return them humanely. There are some signs, the current government is claiming that is what they are currently doing. I'd like to see evidence of that, but that would actually be a genuine deterrent, unlike all the Rwanda nonsense.
Let me hear from Dan Hodges. Dan, what is your view in answer to Olivia's question?
Well, to answer the question, yes. I mean, we should have safe and legal routes. I mean, I presume Andrew is not arguing we shouldn't, because it's never been the policy of your party or your government that we shouldn't have a safe and legal route for people to enter the country. I presume you'd accept that.
Of course there should be a safe and legal route. What I don't want to do is to introduce a system which actually encourages people to come here, because we cannot take any more than we are already taking.
No, but you accept.
And there's no mandate.
But
for
to
that.
answer the question, you accept we should have safe and legal routes.
I accept there should be a system for someone who is genuinely seeking asylum and refuge to be able to apply to come to the United Kingdom.
And that should be a safe and legal route.
Depends what you mean by that phrase, doesn't it, really?
Well, do you believe we should have a safe and legal route?
I've just said to you, I believe that anyone who's genuinely seeking asylum should have the ability to apply to come to seek refuge in any decent Western democracy, and certainly we have a proud record of that.
But they don't.
Right.
But they don't have any routes.
So unless you're a Syrian or Ukrainian or...
No, but absolutely. But just to pin this down, I mean, you presumably believe that means of applying should be safe? Not dangerous.
We're going around in circles here. I've already said...
Well, we're not going. Well, the reason we're going around in circles is because you're not answering the question. Do you believe there should be a safe and legal route for people to come into the country? For some reason,
a way of applying. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any
I'm sorry. I don't disagree with your broader premise. What I'm concerned about is why are you not prepared to say there should be a safe and legal route? You just accepted. We have a proud history. You also accept we have to have a way of meeting our obligations in relation to
So what is your
refugees.
definition of a safe and legal route compared to the current way we deal with asylum?
Well, the problem was at the end, as I think we all know, the government shut down almost, if not all, safe and legal routes. I think possibly with the exception of people with British military forces in Afghanistan. Obviously, it has to be broader than that, doesn't it? We have to have a safe and legal route for a certain number of refugees to obtain sanctuary in this country if we want to deal with this problem. Presumably, you're sure. I mean, I'm not entirely sure what you're saying. On the one hand, you're saying we have a proud record. On the other hand, you're saying you seem to be acknowledging we do have an obligation to meet certain obligations to provide some sanctuary for refugees. But then you're... I don't get I generally don't get what you're saying. You seem to be unable to say we should have a safe and legal route for a certain number of refugees to enter this country. And what I don't understand is that has never been the position of your party. I don't think it's the position of your party now. You might want to have a word with your shadow foreign secretary after this interview. And so, because I'm not entirely sure Andrew Mitchell doesn't agree with the concept of safe and legal routes.
And Dan, can I follow up and ask Andrew? Tom Tugendhat has come out and said there should be a cap of 100,000. I'm not entirely clear where this figure of 100,000 comes from.
Is this asylum or immigration? Surely not asylum.
No.
Immigration. Yes, yeah.
It's a lovely round number. He says 100,000. You say what?
So I think there should be a cap. What that cap is, that would have to be voted through by Parliament. So Parliament would have to decide, and we've got to be accountable. Now, I know, through knocking on the doors, and I'm sure that Tim had the same experience, people in our country believe that immigration's gone too far. Now, immigration, including everybody that's coming into our country, whether students, asylum seekers, far too many people. It's unsustainable. So there has to be a way of controlling this. And if we don't, they're going to vote for a party that eventually will. So we have to have a very tough approach to dealing with this in the future.
I completely agree. I don't necessarily disagree with anything what you're saying. I just want to pin this down because I think it's quite important. Yes, there has to be a cap. You're presumably talking about net migration.
Yes.
Right, so you want 100,000 people who come here. So forget the figure. You want a cap on the number of people who come here to work in important industries, to work in certain services, etc., right? Fine. But then are you then saying Britain should uniquely amongst countries in the civilised world should then, on top of that, allow no asylum seekers?
I haven't said that at all.
Right, so, right, fine.
We are sort of
fine. So I'm just right. So you do accept we should have asylum seekers. I'm just trying to work out how you think they should get here.
I've made it clear that, of course, Britain has an obligation, as we've always
proved. So how do they get here, Andrew, under your system?
They can apply in the usual way.
There isn't a usual way.
Let me give Tim Farron the last word on this, and then we're going to go to another question.
This is a huge challenge, and it's a tragedy as well, as we've seen today. It's a consistent series of tragedies. The people who make these incredibly dangerous journeys, starting from very dangerous places, very often the least dangerous thing they've done is cross the channel, by the way. If you've gone through Libya, if you've escaped from as Isaac Worky in Eritrea, and you're about to be conscripted to murder your own family, reasonable chance crossing the channel is a piece of cake compared to the things that you had to do. But what we need to remember is that we're talking about safe and legal routes. Maybe not entirely exhaustive list, but nearly. A handful of people who helped us militarily in Afghanistan, some people from Syria, Ukrainians. I'm nearly at the end of the list of people where there is any kind of safe and legal route. So when people come to the UK to claim asylum and they're not in those groups, they have one option and one option only, is get on a boat or climb onto the underside of a lorry. And that is not right. Now, there are multiple ways we can act to stop this, being much tougher in terms of assessing people quickly and returning those people who are not genuine refugees. But you'll only know that if you actually assess them rather than just returning them to Rwanda or some other such nonsense, or you provide some safe and legal routes that means people do not have to take dangerous, life-threatening journeys. And this government in place now and the one it replaced have so far got no plan to do that.
OK, we're going to stop that debate and discussion about our first question there, because we're going to address an even more complicated subject next, and that's the situation in the Middle East. You're listening to Cross Question. Call us with your questions for the panel tonight. Tim Farron of the Liberal Democrats, Conservative MP for Romford, Andrew Rosindell, Gina Miller, businesswoman and political activist, and Dan Hodges, a columnist for the Mail on Sunday. 0345 6060 973 for your questions to the panel. You can text us at 84850. The time on Cross Question, 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
Jump
Cross Question on LBC. Text 84850.
And it is already a very lively edition of Cross Question. My guests tonight are Tim Farron, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, MP for Westmorland and Lonsdale, Andrew Rosindell, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Romford, Gina Miller, a businesswoman and political activist, and Dan Hodges, columnist for The Mail on Sunday. Our next question has been sent in on text by Scott in West Hampstead. He says, Benjamin Netanyahu says that it is shameful for Britain to stop the supply, at least restrict the supply of arms to Israel. Does the panel think that it is shameful, or do they think that Netanyahu's handling of the Gaza conflict has been shameful? Gina Miller.
Well, if you look at the riots and strikes in Israel, against its own people, against Netanyahu, they believe that his handling of what's going on in Gaza and the conflict is shameful, and that he's putting his political career before them, before the people. And this idea that you can crush an ideology, because Hamas are terrorists, but they are touting an ideology that you can close down an ideology with war or end it with war, is simply fantasy. So the idea that he has to go forwards and negotiate peace is really what both sides are asking for, and his own people are asking for that. I wish he would actually put his politics aside and think about his own people.
But what's your view on the announcement David Lammy made in the House of Commons yesterday about arms shipments?
Look, it was last year, it was 0.02% of arms going to Israel came from the UK, so it's symbolic, as many people have said. But after the restoration of the funding of aid going to Palestinian refugees, plus them dropping the opposition to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, for the warrant against Netanyahu, I think they're saying that Britain is going to be much more critical than just supporting Israel, which is right, because we need a ceasefire. And with the anniversary coming up on the 7th of October, I think it's so important that the government works with international agencies and with other countries, the US and Middle Eastern negotiated nations doing the negotiations, to say that we need a ceasefire as a first step to a long-term peace.
Andrew Rosindell, which bit of this equation is shameful? The suspension of some weapons shipments to Israel by the new government, or, as Scott is asking, Benjamin Netanyahu's handling of the Gaza conflict?
Well, we should be supporting Israel. They're a democracy, a liberal democracy. The people in Parliament on the Labour side that are arguing for a policy which is anti-Israel are effectively... Well, they wouldn't survive in Gaza. Hamas are a terrorist. Gina said that. They are a terrorist organisation. They are funded by Iran. We should not be supporting them. We should be, yes, looking for a long-term peaceful solution, but we must defend a democratic liberal democracy such as Israel. And by doing this, we're actually going against that principle that we ourselves are meant to uphold. We mustn't forget what started this on the 7th of October last year, and the tragic murder of the hostages yesterday, I think 6 of them. I mean, what a day to then talk about stopping arms sales to Israel when the 7th of October is when this began. And it's Hamas are the people that need to go. They need to leave the scene, and then we can work to ensure that the Palestinian people can actually live in peace.
Even if
Hamas are there.
Even if the Foreign Office has concluded through this review that there is a risk that some of these weapons components might be used to breach international law.
Well, they're going to use that principle with all other countries as well. Saudi Arabia, for instance, they're going to employ the same principle. Ultimately, you could argue that about everything. In the end, you wouldn't sell arms to anyone in case it falls into the wrong hands or is misused. So we simply cannot go down that road. And for the Labour government to actually be so against Israel in such an obvious way so quickly, and David Lammy's remarks as well about Netanyahu, all of this adds up to what I think is a Labour Party that is appeasing a certain section of its lost voters rather than doing the right thing.
Tim Farron, what was your view on David Lammy's announcement yesterday?
Well, it's fair to say that other governments, British governments in the past, have done this kind of thing. Margaret Thatcher, Ted Heath, Tony Blair, David Cameron have all suspended arms sales to Israel.
And Joe Biden held up a small portion of arms shipments for Israel just a few months ago.
It's not throwing Israel under the bus. It's about, I am a passionate supporter of and friend of Israel, and a person who wildly disagrees with Netanyahu, by the way. Our sister party, Yesh Atid, led by Yair Lapid, the former Prime Minister, I hope he will be again, and if he is, then there's every chance you'll see diplomatic solution, because Gina said, I don't think there's a military solution to all this. Hamas are terrorists. They can have no future in any kind of two-state solution, and neither can Netanyahu, in my view. So, but I have to say, I have some sympathy with what Andrew says, in the sense that I think that Labour Party's current behaviour on this issue seems to be driven by internal party concerns, dare I say it, a little bit like the Tories are over immigration issues, and I hanker for a government that acts wisely and takes all things on balance, rather than just acting to...
Do you think they should publish their legal advice?
It would be good to see. I mean,
it would be good to see, wouldn't it?
On what basis have they made this decision? The Liberal Democrats take the view there should be a presumption of denial when it comes to arms trade with a whole bunch of different countries, and you've mentioned some of them already, who are guilty of, far, even greater crimes, should we say, than we suspect Israel may or may not be guilty of at this moment in time. But look, as somebody who counts himself as a passionate friend of Israel, my great fear, or my frustration, can I say that, about Netanyahu and those around him, is they make the life or the job for those of us who want to defend Israel's right to defend itself and to exist at all that much harder. And that's why I think he does need to go.
Dan Hodges, Nick Ferrari on LBC this morning described the government's action as performative. Do you think that's what it was yesterday?
Absolutely. I think, and I'm no Nick and others. Tim, sorry, and others. I'm no fan of Netanyahu, but I think he was absolutely right. And I think the reason why it was performative, I think firstly Andrew's absolutely right. I think you have to have the context of this. Literally the announcement being made as the victims of the Hamas murders were being buried. And I think the key thing to focus on for me is this. I've seen a number of rationales put forward for why the government made this decision, and none of them add up. If you look at if you actually read David Lammy's statement in the House yesterday, he specifically said he had instructed the Foreign Office on him becoming Foreign Secretary to conduct a review of what was going on in relation to Gaza, and was very specific that they had not provided any evidence that Israel was committing war crimes. He was very specific about that fact. So the legal basis, if you like, for the restriction of the arms sales doesn't stand unless you're going to take, as Andrew correctly pointed out, you're going to say, well, theoretically at some point in the future weapons could be used, but you could say that about any weapon. The second argument that some people have put forward is, well, it will have a practical impact on the ground. But again, for example, the arms embargo imposed an embargo on weapons that could be in which aircraft could specifically target targets on the ground. But there was no ban on the aircraft themselves that target those weapons. So that's not going to have any practical impact. You could argue it have a negative impact because it makes sort of proper targeting harder. There's an argument put forward that this would in some way produce diplomatic pressure on Israel and Netanyahu to adopt a different stance. Well, we saw how effective that was by the tweet that was put out by the Israeli government this morning, attacking the British government over this. And that just leaves you with the final point, which Andrew and Tim have actually said, which is this is dominated to some extent by internal party politics within the Labour Party. But even on that level, and again, you've already seen it, I've spent this afternoon arguing with Owen Jones and people on the left who are basically saying it doesn't go far enough in terms of penalising Israel.
It does.
So on no level, either legal, practical, diplomatic or political, does this decision make any sense at all?
It does seem, Gina Miller, to be neither fish nor fowl.
That's why I think it's really important that they publish the legal advice to see what exactly the 30 licences that they've put sanctions on.
Can I just say just one thing? Sorry to butt in. not only should they have an obligation to.
Well, they were
because
calling,
in opposition,
I was just going to say
David
that.
Lammy
I was just going to say
specifically
that.
demanded
In opposition,
that
they
Andrew's
were saying
government
no,
publish
I
legal
agree.
advice. So I don't understand how we can even argue against publishing the legal advice.
I think it's poor form that actually, having pushed and said that Tory should publish legal advice, that he just didn't come out and do it. So we need to understand why those 30 specific export licenses have been suspended out of the 350. But the idea, I think, going back to what you were saying about the funerals yesterday, you need to listen to the speeches of the members of the families of those who were so horribly executed by Hamas. And they are so critical of Netanyahu. And they are standing up at the funerals themselves and saying he has to go to the table and he has to do a hostage exchange immediately for the 101 that are still there and for the Hamas. That's members of the family themselves. They're much better placed than us.
Can I just say
to be saying that and demanding that?
I completely understand the position of the families, right? I completely understand that. But I have a genuine question on this. My understanding was that we consistently had a position that was a cross-party position, which was we did not, as a government, it was the British government's position, we did not negotiate with terrorists and we did not negotiate with hostage takers. Now, unless that position has changed, and I don't know when it did change, and I'm not aware that it's changed, and, you know, the representatives of the main political parties could tell if they've got any information it's changed. I don't think we are in a position to demand. I completely understand why the families are in a position to do that. I completely understand that. I don't understand why we think, as a British government, we should be in a position to pressure or demand Netanyahu engages in negotiations with Hamas over the release of the hostages, when our position is we shouldn't negotiate with them.
But channeling my inner Washington correspondent, which is where I normally find myself, it really doesn't matter what the British government says about that, right? I mean, the American government is pushing Netanyahu. Joe Biden yesterday said he hasn't done enough to negotiate this hostage exchange.
But that adds into what I was saying, is what is the practical benefit of what the government has announced?
OK, more of your questions to our panel. Tim Farron of the Liberal Democrats, Andrew Rosindell of the Conservatives, Gina Miller, businesswoman and political activist, and Dan Hodges, a columnist from the Mail on Sunday. You can call us at 0345 6060 973. You can text questions to the panel at 84850, and at 31 minutes past 8, the news headlines come from Daryl Jackson.
French authorities say 12 people, mostly women, have died after a migrant boat capsized in the Channel. It happened off the coast of Cap Greenet this morning. Dozens more were rescued by emergency services. Officials in Ukraine say at least 50 people are now known to have died in Russia's deadliest attacks so far this year. 2 ballistic missiles have hit a military training facility and nearby hospital. And former Conservative Chancellor Lord Ken Clarke has told LBC if Rachel Reeves does the right things for the economy, she'll be hugely unpopular. He says the current Chancellor should ride out any backlash to get the UK's finances back on track. LBC weather dry for much of the UK tonight. Some showers for Northern Ireland, Wales, North West England and North East Scotland, and a low of 4 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question on LBC.
Back with our panel, taking your questions on anything that is on your mind. And let's see what Colin, a first-time caller to LBC and to Cross Question from Skegness, has on his mind this evening. Good evening, Colin.
Joe, good evening.
What's your question?
Well, my question is that I'm 65 years old and I've had a small procedure done at the hospital this week and found that I had 4 prescriptions to pay for, which I can quite easily afford. And I'm wondering why that the prescriptions are still free to people from the age of 60, when at 60 years old with normally no dependents at home and maybe no mortgage and still working until your normal retirement age, the affordability is okay for a free prescription. Would this not help fill the gap for the winter allowance?
Andrew Rosindell.
Well, I guess if you want to pay for your prescriptions, you can just pay for them if you want to, if you're worried about that. But there has to be a policy for everybody in this country. You can't have one policy for one group of people, another policy for another group of people. The winter fuel allowance was for everybody, and you're talking about 10 million pensioners that are now losing that, £300, I think it is. Now, of course, there are lots of people that maybe don't need it. And I very much believe that the welfare bill in this country is way too much, and we do need to reduce what we spend. So it's right that people that don't need it shouldn't claim it, but vast numbers of people do need it, and it's those people that are going to be caught. They're going to suffer. But the problem here, I think, basically, is that you've got a Labour government that's come into power and done things that he didn't tell anyone he was going to do. Now, if it was in their manifesto that we're going to scrap the winter fuel allowance or make it means tested, fine. They've got a mandate to do it. Where was their mandate to do this? They've done it by stealth. They've come into government, huge majority, and they're railroading things through that nobody voted for.
Tim Farron, I think what Colin is essentially asking is, should there be more benefits that actually are now universally available that should instead be means tested?
Well, dealing with the issue of the winter fuel payments, that would have been a way of dealing with it if you wanted to try and make sure that those who were better off didn't receive it anymore. I mean, over the years, I've had plenty of people who are at the wealthier end of those retired in my constituency saying, how can I give it away? What charity can I donate it to? I don't need this. The problem is, because it's a blanket cut for everybody who's not on pension credit, and by the way, if you're earning, £13,000, you're not on pension credit. So if you're earning significantly less than the minimum wage, then you're not on pension credit, therefore you will not qualify for this. So I think it's cruel, it's a blunt instrument, and it's unnecessary. I think that the reality is that as we see a 10% rise in energy costs against this autumn, a phrase that many of us have used, including Rachel Reeves, that pensioners will be making the choice between heating and eating, and in some cases not being able to do either. I represent a constituency where the average age is 10 years above the national average, lots of homes which are poorly insulated, old Lake District properties, and people living on basically the state pension and nothing else. So these people will be hit by that, and I think it almost feels like the Labour government has had a honeymoon, shorter than Liz Truss's premiership. And why do this? I mean, I understand they're going to try and balance the books and all that, but I don't think this is a way to do it. I think it's also a way to lose political capital in order to do things which are perhaps even more important.
Gina Miller, what's your view on the universality of some of these benefits?
I agree with Tim. I don't understand why they're doing this. They have to balance the books. There's lots of other ways of doing it that are much more sustainable and would actually raise a lot more money. This is the thing. It doesn't actually raise that much money, what they're doing. On a very practical note, just to refer to what Tim said, there are about 1 million people who should be registered for the pension credit. And if they're not registered, they won't get the winter allowance. So I'd say to everybody, go on the government pension calculator website. Make sure that if you're registered, you can apply for the pension credit, that you register as soon as possible, so then you'll get the extra £300, because pension credit's about 3,900. So it's really important that those 1 million people of the 10 million who will be hit actually go and do that in a really practical way. But I really don't understand the policy. There's so many other ways that you could raise money, significant amounts of money, and it's too blunt an instrument. And there are people who may have supposedly wealth, but they don't have cash wealth to go and then pay their bills in winter. And we have an ageing population in this country. It seems to me unnecessarily cruel.
Dan Hodges, in a sense, I think what Colin is getting at is that the government says it's found this £22 billion hole. Shouldn't you actually just try and claw this money back from anywhere that you can? And if Colin can afford to pay for his prescription, or maybe can manage without winter fuel allowance, there should be an ability to be flexible about the way in which you fill the hole.
No, for a number of reasons. Firstly, Colin is labouring under a misconception. Colin has not got his prescription for free. Colin's paid for it. He spent his year paying national insurance. He's been paying tax. So, Colin, you have actually paid for that. That doesn't just magically come out of anywhere. In terms of the other side of the equation, which is in particular the gap in terms of pensioners and energy, what the government should be doing what Keir Starmer should be doing in government is what Keir Starmer was saying it should be done when he was in opposition, which is, we just had a rise in the energy price cap. That raise should be reversed, and the energy companies who have secured obscene profits from the energy markets over the last few years, and we've all seen those profits. They should have those profits capped. And if those energy companies say that they can't afford to have their profits capped, and they can't afford to provide their services at a price that their customers can afford, then fine. Then those companies should be nationalised.
Okay, and we should say to Colin in Skegness that we wish him well as he
yes, absolutely.
as he continues to recover. Let's move to Jeremy in Brighton, who has sent a text question in to the panel. He says, nice easy one, who would you like to see become the next Tory leader? Andrew Rosindell. That's not that we want you to become the next Tory leader, but who would you
I'm not in the contest, but I have this afternoon sat through 2 hours of hustings listening to all 6
How was
candidates. Quite gruelling, but...
going above the call of duty?
Well, no, it's important to hear because you've got 6 very good people, all of whom have got slightly different perspectives on things, but they want one thing, and that is to rebuild the party and ensure that we're in a fit state to win the next general election. So I've heard them all, and I've listened to them over the last month, and I've come to the view that the best person placed to be our next leader and our future Prime Minister is Robert Jenrick.
Why?
So Robert, I believe, speaks from the heart. He's saying things in a very clear way. He's robust, and he's honest, and he's saying it as it is. We didn't do well. We made a lot of mistakes in the last government. We did a lot of good things, a lot of things that we don't talk about that we did extremely well on. But on a lot of things, particularly on immigration, without going back to that issue, we failed the British people. We said we would do things and we didn't do it. So what's required, I think, is a leader who actually says it as it is, who actually is honest with the British people, and who wants to be Prime Minister not just for power and to have patronage and all the rest of it, but actually wants to do right for the country. I think the Conservative Party is still the best hope for Britain. We've already seen, Tim's highlighted this, already in a matter of weeks, the Labour Party is failing in office, their popularity is plummeting. I think that the volatility of politics as it is today, there's every chance that in 4 or 5 years' time, the British public will want a change. I think Robert's the person to take us forward. I think he should actually, he and Priti Patel, I believe, 2 of them together as a team. I would like to see them as a team to refresh the party, come up with very strong, clear, definite policies. Margaret Thatcher in 1975, when she became leader, we had a one-term Labour government. She spent that time coming up with new, clear, radical plan for the country. That's what we need to do. I want this to be like 1974, not like 1997, where we spent, 15 years arguing with ourselves until we finally got some kind of power, unfortunately, with the Liberal Democrats. So I think Robert Jenrick is the man to take us forward.
But in a word, you don't view Robert Jenrick as simply being a caretaker?
Oh, absolutely not. No, he's someone that will lead the party, assuming he's elected, and I think he will, lead the party in the next 4 to 5 years, and I believe he's got the best possible chance of winning the next election and being our next Prime Minister.
OK, Tim Farron.
Well, whoever I was to offer any support to would be finished. I remember one saying something nice about Rory Stewart during a previous, who was, of course,
Look what happened to him.
My friend, exactly that. So
Of course, you could take a cynical view here. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone you want, but someone you'd like to see.
Well, so let's look at it this way. So, I mean, I'm sure they all have their merits, but I think maybe a major consideration, it would appear, for the Conservative Party at the moment, who appear pretty beleaguered post-election, and we had Treasury questions today, for example. There were only 3 Tory backbenchers asked questions. There were about 15 of us. First few days, it looks like the Liberal Democrats, the official opposition. That's a position we're happy to bid for, and to be people actually hold the government to account and to be willing to challenge the Labour Party in power rather than fight amongst ourselves. But I suspect what is occupying Conservative MPs and the wider membership is, how do we deal with reform? What's our stance and our posture towards reform? And I think there are 3 basic options. One is merge with them. The other is to scrap about in the same end of the political spectrum as them. And the other is to actually challenge them and take them on. I suspect it won't be the latter. And I would urge the Conservative Party, if they want to be in power again, and I'm sure they're bound to take my advice, but let's look at Tony Blair, look at Keir Starmer. When their party was overtaken and infected by extremists, the answer was not to throw red meat at those extremists, it was to get a scalpel and to get rid of them. And that is how Blair won, and it's how Starmer won. And the Conservative Party has a habit in the last decade of seeing extremists and just chucking them red meat, a bit more red meat, a bit more red meat. They might just go away eventually. That has never worked, and a Conservative Party that is not able to look like it is competent and able to represent the whole of the country, we might call it from the centre ground, is not going to get elected. So in that sense, I'd be delighted with Jenrick. It will show they've learned all the wrong lessons.
Gina Miller.
I'd like to look at it from a slightly different point of view, which is our democracy only works when we have a strong opposition. And at the moment, we have an autocracy. We don't actually have an opposition at the moment. We have a placeholder in Sunak who's just there in name. And this is going to go on for months and months. So it's not a good place for us to be as a country, as a democracy. But at the same time, are we asking this question about who will be the leader? I was really interested in some research that was published today by More in Common, which showed that 70% of voters don't actually know who most of the candidates are, the 6 candidates, and don't think any of them are good enough to win the next election. And that was research that came out today. What was interesting in that research, which I can see would be a future for the Conservative government to get out of the fact that they've broken our country completely for 14 years, is that Tom Tugendhat seemed to appeal, because of his military record, to reform voters. And because he was more to the centre ground, as Tim says, would look at appealing to the Labour and Lib Dem candidates as well. So if they're going to learn lessons and look at who it is they need to bring together to vote, to build their vote, then from the analysis, it would be him.
OK.
Gina, have you just endorsed Tom? Because you basically just killed him. You realise you've just killed any remote justice. I'm joking.
I'm quoting the research.
I'm kind of joking.
And Tim Montgomery is back.
Dan Hodges, I've got to get to a break, but who is your candidate?
I'm not going to say, because we are literally just effectively at the start of this complex. So I want to hear from the candidates.
Okay.
The one thing I would say is the Tories have to decide. Do they think, and I said we got a little bit of this from Andrew, was the last election just a blip, or are there more fundamental issues to address? I think there are probably more fundamental issues.
Absolutely.
And there are more of your questions to come here on Cross Question, where the time is now on LBC, 12 minutes to 9.
This is LBC.
The thing
Cross Question on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Which is exactly what Alan in Reigate has done. Alan, what's your question for the panel tonight?
Good evening, Simon and panel. We're all complaining about no funds in the UK. Is it time for a wealth tax? The financial patriotic millionaires want it. And the financial transaction tax to solve all our financial problems.
Tim Farron, a wealth tax, time for one?
A lot of arguments I've heard for it. I mean, patriotic millionaires are an interestingly named group, but they are basically a bunch of very wealthy people who think they should pay more tax. And I welcome that. I think, yes, absolutely, that is part of it. I also think, we're going back to our previous discussion about the Conservative Party and Reform voters, it is wrong to assume that all Reform voters are just obsessed with immigration. I don't think they are. I think many of them are deeply angry about the sense of Britain being broken and unfair. And I think the sense of inequality is what drives a lot of those people. It's worth bearing in mind, you look at the areas where the Reform Party did the least well, it was in the areas where the Lib Dems did well. And it, in large part, is down to a kind of relationship I think we have with our communities and our constituencies, which I kind of think restores trust. But I think there's a lack of trust in the way our politics works when when people see extremely wealthy people getting wealthier and people having to make do and mend, lose their winter fuel allowance and see cuts in public services at the same time. It doesn't add up. Yeah, I think there's a very good, strong case for it.
Andrew Rosindell.
Well, people voted Reform for lots of different reasons. So Tim is right to say that it's not just about immigration. And one of the things that I think people are unhappy about is the failure of public services. So the phrase that Britain is broken, nothing works in Britain, I heard it on the doorstep all the time. So is the answer to raise more taxes and spend more money? Actually, no, I don't think it is. I think the taxes are already way too high. They're higher than they've been in decades. And actually, we're shoveling money into public services, but not getting a better result. The health service is a prime example. I think the figures are in the last 5 years, we're spending an extra 20%, but we're not really getting much of an increase in productivity in the health service. So the idea that the public sector needs more and more money and more money to spend and tax people more, look, this is the way to destroy the British economy. The higher taxes, the less incentivised people are to work, people won't invest in our country, people that are the wealth creators will find other ways round it. This is not the way to do it. Margaret Thatcher proved that what you do is you make a bigger cake, and so you need enterprise, you need to have people that will create the wealth, not people that just work out ways how to spend other people's money.
People out of work and blew all the oil money. That's how we paid for the economy back then.
We had years of socialism that she needed to cure, and she did it.
I think that I would just push back against that. I mean, first of all, I'm not somebody who wants a high-tax economy, but let's remember that we spend less per capita on health in the UK than the States and most countries in Europe. So the idea that we've spending too much on the NHS is not true. It's also worth bearing in mind that you're talking about what's good for the economy. When I've got people in my constituency waiting 2 months for their first cancer surgery when they've been diagnosed, not only do those people have a massively greater chance of dying from their cancer, those who survive it may well survive it and then not be able to work. And so much of the cutting back and the making do and mend within the National Health Service actually robs the economy of a workforce.
What about running things more efficiently instead of spending more money?
I'm totally in favour of all that.
You're taking money out of people's pockets, and a lot of it's being wasted.
Yes, I'm not saying the only answer is that, but you're saying we're effectively spending too much or enough on the NHS. The obvious example of everybody's experience of who use the NHS.
We're higher tax we've been in decades.
The case.
And we want more tax.
I want us to spend more on the health service and on social care.
I tell you what, when Andrew catches up with the people who've been raising taxes to the highest level in decades,
I know. I wonder who they are.
There's going to be hell to pay.
But Dan Hodges, what do you think about the idea of a wealth tax?
Well, it kind of feeds into my slightly facetious comment to Andrew there. I mean, I understand the instinctive desire for people to pay more in taxation, but the reality is we have, as a country, been raising more in taxation. But, although Conservatives seem to forget this, we've been raising more in taxation than we have at any point in our national history. We've been spending more than at any point in our national history, and we've been borrowing any more in our national history. Now, I'm just saying, in a practical point of view, I'm not entirely sure how much additional capacity we have to do that, particularly given in an environment where we have a flatlining economy. I can see we can all see, we were talking in relation to other issues, a situation where we could be potentially heading for some quite significant geopolitical shocks. Will have a global impact on the economy. And I understand the importance of the politics of redistribution and a sense that there is a lot of anger that a sort of slightly ill-defined elite have been milking it, whilst ordinary people have been paying, have been shouldering the bill. But I do think there are some basic economics that we have to look at. We are not going to have the capacity for the state to spend us out of the hole we're in. We are going to need some sort of an economy that is driven by private wealth creators. And taxing them till the pipsqueak, I'm not entirely sure
Gina Miller.
Look,
it's either, how do you get money in? It's either taxes, borrowing, or growing the economy. And there isn't enough emphasis on growing the economy. But what I think Colin's talking about is the super rich. And I was advocating in my manifesto for a 1% on people with over 10 million for a short period of time to help. Nobody I spoke to had a problem with that in that bracket, and there are not that many people in that bracket, as you call them, the philanthropic. They hadn't got a problem with that. But it's not one solution for everything. You've also got tax evasion and that whole ecosystem of people who should be paying their fair taxes. There's also the tax gap of the HMRC not being properly funded to collect the taxes that are due. It is not just one solution for all of this. You've also got all the people like Amazon who don't pay their proper share of taxes in this country. You've got people like Microsoft and all the other tech companies who are headquartered abroad who don't pay their taxes in this country. There are other ways of raising the money. The black hole of 22 billion could be sorted almost overnight if you actually did some very smart, pragmatic things. And that does not include bringing pensions credit down or reducing winter allowances or taxing everybody. It's not about taxing everybody. It's making sure it's the fair taxes collected from those who should be paying the tax and the super wealthy for a short period of time helping out. And they don't have a problem with that.
There's one piece of good news. We're not paying the EU any more money. We're saving 20 billion because of that.
To boost our economy.
We're not funding the EU anymore.
I'll tell you what, why don't we just grow the economy by bringing a customs union? For goodness sake, it's the most simple thing we could do to boost our economy.
All right, it is time for our fun question of the night. We've reached that point of the programme, and it comes from Alex in Holborn, who says Donald Trump has been ordered by a judge to stop playing an Isaac Hayes song at campaign rallies. In fact, Alex, Donald Trump has now been told, requested to stop playing so many songs by so many different artists at campaign rallies, you could fill an LP with it, both sides. Alex wants to know, if you could pick a campaign song, what song would you use? Tim Farron, have you ever used a campaign song?
Yeah, well, not a campaign song, but when I was the Lib Dems party president during the coalition, which was a pretty beleaguered period of time, and then I became leader, which is even better, I used to walk on to Lauren Laverne and Mint Rael's Don't Falter, because I felt that we were at risk of doing so otherwise. But yeah, great song. I don't know, I could think of other ones. My favourite song, I could find any excuse to walk on to, is Appetite by Prefab Sprout, all about
Prefab Sprout.
Lust for life in whatever circumstances.
What a classic.
Don't you saw my tune, Tim? Lust for Life, Iggy Pop.
Andrew Russell.
I was going to say.
The only time I played music on the loudspeaker... The only time I played music on the loudspeaker was Rule Britannia when we won the Brexit referendum.
Gina Miller.
I was going to say, well, one of mine would be Iggy Pop's Lust for Life, because I think that, we need to make... But I think I would go for... Because we underestimate how productive we are when we're a healthy, happy nation. It is a huge part that, our 80% of our, if you like, our illness and our health comes from social factors, and we have to concentrate more on our health and happiness for our nation. So I'd go for happy.
Classic group. Dan Hodges.
I'm going to go for the cliche. Still, things can only get better.
Yeah.
They didn't necessarily. But anyway, it was a good song.
Nobody said Oasis song. Notice? Yeah.
My thanks to Dan Hodges, columnist for the Mail on Sunday, Gina Miller, businesswoman and political activist, Andrew Rosindell, Conservative MP for Romford, and Tim Farron, MP for Westmorland and Lonsdale and former leader of the Liberal Democrats. That is Cross Question for tonight. We will do it all again tomorrow. Into our final hour tonight, and I want to hear whether you still have pride in Britain. A new survey suggests that pride in British history is plummeting rapidly, reflecting the fact that we are all thinking more reflectively about the UK's historic place in the world. The British Social Attitude Survey found that we are still pretty proud of the country's achievements, especially in the realms of sport and the arts, but less proud of our democracy, economic achievements, and of our political influence globally. What makes you proud of Britain? Are you still stirred by the playing of Jerusalem or the last night of the proms or the FA Cup final? Did Team GB bring a tear to your eye? What warms the cockles of your patriotic heart?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, at least 12 migrants most of whom